All right. So yeah, that concludes the presentation part of today. And up next, we have our Q&A with today's presenters. The format of this Q&A will involve starting with the questions that attendees asked using the Q&A function within Zoom, followed by an opportunity for attendees to raise their hand and ask a question live. We just ask that you please focus your question toward a specific presenter and try to keep your questions focused. So with that, Aylin, do you want to pick our first question?
Yes.
And also all of our presenters, feel free to turn on your video if you want, or you can just turn on your video when you're being asked a question, or however you want to manage that. And also as another note, we have Sami here instead of Martin. So the talk that Martin gave was in collaboration with Sami. So you heard Martin talking, but Sami is here to answer questions for that talk, just as a note there. Okay.
We actually do have Martin here. Let me promote him as well.
Nice.
So today, basically all of our speakers are joining us for the live Q&A, save for Gabriela Savitska and Reagan Harley. We have collected the questions that people have sent in the Q&A section or in the Q&A function throughout the conference, and we will now be posing these questions to each speaker. And for anyone who's still in the conference listening, and you just come up with a new question, please ask it, raise your hand or send in the question in the chat, and we'll have these wonderful speakers answering these questions live for you. So we'll start with one of our finalists, Uma, who also kicked off today's conference section on natural sciences. So we received a submission from Craig Clark, who said, "Amazing talk. I just wondered, could there be, or has it been confirmed that there is a worsening of OCD symptoms in the day following MDMA use during the come down period when serotonin levels are lowered?" I will post this question in the chat just so you can read it all.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here. And that is such a great question that just fuels me because that's what I want to figure out. But as far as I know, and I could just not be aware of research that has been done or has been published, but I don't know of a study on that. OCD is something that is just so understudied in clinical populations as well as preclinical models for various reasons. And I would love for it to be studied more. That's a great hypothesis or idea. And as far as I understand from the literature in general, the lasting effects of MDMA and other classic psychedelics are posited to last far longer than the half-life in our bodies. So how that plays out in terms of actual, transmitter levels, I'm not exactly sure with OCD, but my answers, I would love to find out. That's what I want to do with my life.
Thank you from Craig. Did anybody have any other questions regarding OCD and the use of MDMA to treat it? Anything impromptu right now?
Or classic psychedelics in general. I kind of focused on MDMA assisted therapy because of the, current state of clinical trials, but I'm so open to questions on psychedelics in general.
We have a raised hand from Clifford. Would you like to talk or chat.
Hi. My question is very simple. How you doing? Nice presentation. Everybody, you kicked their ass today. It was great. So my question is this, and this is going to be specific to the MDMA, component of your discussion. I'm wondering, how has your information, your research, how's it been received by those who are proponents of MDMA to treat everything? Just wondering.
I love that question because this is the first time I am coming out of the closet publicly, if you will, regarding my interest in this topic. So currently I'm a master's student at UT Dallas, and of the incredible labs that are available, none of them remotely study psychedelics. I mean, psychedelic neurobiology research is so new and coming at various schools like Zarmeen's, which is amazing. And I strive to do that with my life. But anyway, the point is, I currently I'm learning how to conduct this research in other areas, specifically with pain and stress in my lab. So I talk about this a lot, and I probably received as kind of strange. I have talked to different professors based on how safe I feel with them. And I've generally gotten the response of, they have seen the data and it's promising, but also there's a lot of fear and stigma around it. And I will be honest, I was pretty fearful of sharing this talk and being so explicit with my thoughts and comments on current research. As you said, people who are just so such proponents of MDMA, solving everything, and psychedelics at large solving everything. And I'm just fearful because I am, such a proponent of the field and respect the history and the war on being able to study psychedelics for so long. And so I'm nervous to say anything that could potentially go against it, but my goal isn't to go against it. It's just to help narrow and further down the field and be, of service to as many people as possible in an ethical way. So yeah, I will now find out after this goes publicly live how people feel about it. And I'm working on a manuscript on this same topic that was accepted as an abstract. But who knows if they will accept the actual manuscript. And I'm also presenting this topic as a poster at various conferences. So I'll see how people receive that too. And I'm very, very nervous. So thank you for validating that fear in me.
Uma, I just want to respond to that a little bit in the nature of discussion here. You've said that multiple times before. I think you talking about something like this, right, that can be seen as critical towards the field at large right now is so important, because it's the only way that the field is going to be furthered, right? We're not all going to sit here and be like, amazing, everything happening is amazing. That's not true, because we just simply as a field will not grow. No other field has ever grown that way. And in fact, that holds scientific inquiry back, right? If you just there's one hypothesis and no one tests alternate hypotheses, or no one brings up any questions. It's the very nature of science, right? So what you're doing, I think, is a vital part of what this field needs. And it just needs more people asking different types of questions and having interests in different parts of the field. So I don't think you should ever feel nervous. If anyone is berating you about this, you need to tell them this is what science is, right? Because that is what science is. But really awesome talk, really awesome topic. I've been very jazzed about what you are interested in. So
thank you so much for saying that. And not just the fact that I get to have this conversation with all of you and get to hear your encouraging words, Zarmeen, that's the value of, beyond anything else of this conference, of what IPN has created to connect with like-minded people in the field who understand it. And so, you're mentoring me right now. And I'm so, so grateful for that. And especially to share my research perspective through the lens of actually having the lived experience with these struggles is a whole new level of vulnerability, because it's something that I for so long felt would be used to invalidate me in academia or in research, but it's why I have the question. And I thank you for creating a space to let me share all of it, and not just my question, but why I have the question. Just want to say that too.
Awesome. All right. Any other questions for Uma? And by the way, we're kind of going in the order of talks today. So after Uma, it's Martin and Sami's talk. But yeah, we'll give it another minute if anybody has a live question for Uma.
I'd love to answer the question about if people can reach out individually to speakers after today. I mean, if I would love to share my information to connect with people, I'll share it in the chat, and anyone else who feels comfortable can do so as well. And in case no one else has any questions, for me, I just wanted to say thank you so much for the space and for asking questions and for watching mine and everyone's talks.
Awesome. Yeah, and that's a good way to handle that question too. So Ryan asked in the chat, is wondering if there's a way for anyone to individually reach out to today's speakers after we conclude today. And so like Uma said, if any of you want to put your email address in the chat to everyone to see if they want to reach out with any questions or something, feel free to put your email in the chat so they can do that. Because maybe there's a question brewing for somebody, but it's not fully formed, so they want to reach out later or something. Yeah. Okay. Well, oh, we have one more. Oh, that was Clifford's hand. Clifford, was that? Did you have a Clifford? Did you have another question for Uma, or did we just forget to lower your hand from earlier?
No, I'm good.
Okay, awesome. Thanks. All right, then we can move on to our next question, which is for Martin and Sami. This is from Bianca. And the question is, for this integrative approach, how do we get psychologists interested in neuroscience and neuroscientists interested in psychology to create an interdisciplinary field of informing care?
Sami, shall I go first then? So basically, how do you build relationships for that cross-pollination between kind of like the circuitry and the higher order of dealings with social behaviors? I mean, for me, I'll give you the self-serving answer, which is to further kind of validate the models, kind of show them that yeah, your social self exists, but it's grounded and constructed by a biological entity as well, and that's worth studying. Convincing them of that is obviously at a professional level is obviously really difficult to have them incorporate it into their work. But from my end, the way I expect it is to just continue to move towards that direction, keep building more and more biologically plausible models, and then eventually show them, okay, this is your brain on acid, and then if they can relate to that, then you can build that bridge there. The other direction I think is a bit harder, in terms of convincing a neuroscientist that psychology might be important, just because it's I guess the cultural thing to be into the hard sciences, and the replication crisis sort of did a number on it as well. So there's, I don't know, be open, don't be assholes to people. That's my answer. I believe, and also, and Zarmeen said, keeping an open mind about what the scientific process is as well, being ready to be open to kind of paradigmatic shifts. Because if you're on the cusp of that, then you're going to be early adopter, you're going to be ahead of the curve in some sense. But Sami, what do you think?
Yeah, very good, Martin. I'll just add to that with a bit of a more abstract response in a way that it might help us to view the self as emergent from the complex interdependencies that produced it. And so if we're going to understand people, it's nice to show an appreciation for lower order systems and higher order systems that are contributing to what's going on with the person.
Excellent. And we can open it up now for any live questions. If anyone has any specifically for Martin and Sami on their talk about enhancing psychedelic assisted psychotherapy with models of the brain. Is that your hand, Aylin?
I do have a question for both of you. Are there many people talking about this in your vicinity? Because when I heard your talk, I thought this is very important and more people should be considering this. And why hasn't it already been considered? Because it seems obvious that we should be looking at what are the actual changes happening on a neurobiological level. Can we measure actual results? Why isn't that already being stringently implemented in the psychedelic assisted therapeutic pipeline? Are there more people, essentially?
I can start again, Sami. So with the modeling, so like the way that you can account for those neurobiological differences, that's coming out of a group from like New Zealand, and they collaborate really tightly with clinical psychologists as well, but they're not working in the psychedelic space. So the deployment of that model specifically has not reached that far, which is why we wanted to kind of make it known and present like what it's how it would fit basically. I agree with you that like that sort of account of things and monitoring things is important. But to our knowledge, no. But obviously, to our knowledge, it's like one of the it's just one of those words you deploy. But no, that like because there is not. It's the way we see it. It's very kind of like it's risky in the way that it's you don't want the subject to feel, you don't want the patient client to feel like they are just a scientific object. And Alex mentioned this in our recordings as well. Like how would a lab make this accessible in turn as well? Like EEG machines, for instance, can be expensive depending on what kind of fracs you're doing as well. So there are a lot of these sort of methodological constraints as well in terms of just equipment and then being able to actually deploy these algorithms to production as well. So in short, the science isn't there yet, but the traces of it certainly are. And I think as PAP opens up more as a space, this would be a kind of tool that'd be very useful in terms of like normalizing it, being like, oh, this is actually your brain on acid. Like, here's the statistical differences over time. But I don't know, Sam, do you have an answer to that from the other side?
I'll just add my own thoughts. Like, very good, Martin. I think so. Martin and I began with it very conceptually, and I think it's definitely a long journey to go for this to be implemented, our actual project idea. And I see two concrete steps in a way. I see a long journey towards enhanced neuroscientific understanding. So how is the brain changing during psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy? And if we're drawing distinctions to cut out the relationships of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, and we're trying to examine that, like how do we put that all together and relate language to brain models and changes in both of those components? Like I think there's a lot of high-level methodological work that can be done. But anyway, after enhancing like a long research program towards enhancing neuroscientific understanding, if we propose that eventually we want to bring this into practice, like there are a lot of practical and ethical questions which we addressed in our presentation. But for one, I think it would just be the research has to be there to inform evidence-informed interpretations of changes in the brain and linking that with language. Like I guess it has to be it's very early on, and we can't get too ahead of ourselves with the interpretations that we make. And we should always include ourselves as the researcher in the phenomena that we examine. Like we are included in constructing like knowledge essentially. So we should just be wary about that along the way for this type of program to be implemented. I think it's important.
Yeah. But the first ethics boards we get past, y'all gonna know about it though. You will hear from us.
And maybe as a follow-up question, what are your next steps?
Yeah, so next step is basically so in my talk, I mentioned like the neuromorphic chips. And so Intel has a whole library platform software solution kind of deal that is in development. So my project is to re-implement that pipeline of analysis into Intel's library so that it can be compiled onto neuromorphic chips. So then we have all the quantitative stuff there. And from there, that's the EEG, and the modeling for EEG is where you would bring it into the PAP, where all you have to do is find a PAP specialized therapist who'd be able to be interested, open to it, you would then find a way to get funding for an EEG machine, or just have one around. And then that would just be, you could go from there. Like being able to develop on the model to actually compute the same kinds of statistical differences that Kasabov and Doberger did. So re-implementing the pipeline is the short answer.
And I'll add to that. I think also it might be helpful, Martin and I have discussed this, kind of writing like a high level paper and work like an actual conceptual paper for a journal that essentially shows appreciation for like a complex systems approach to what we're doing and kind of outlines the theoretical and philosophical implications and assumptions of what we're doing and what does it mean to be sensitized to neural differences while privileging the client's own knowing and experiencing during therapy, kind of playing with questions like that too. Does that fit with you, Martin?
Sure, yeah. Also, but yeah, and we're obviously looking for people who would be interested in review, collaborate. He's very on the psychotherapy side. I'm very on the computational side. Somewhere in between, we would like to meet at the neurobiological, but that's not our trained expertise. So anyone who's like interest is piqued from this, feel free to reach out. And if you're interested in reading the I guess what you can call knowledge that we're going to produce for free.
Awesome. All right. One last chance for anyone to raise their hand to ask a question for Martin and Sami.
We have Clifford.
Maybe Clifford.
I'm here. This is for Zahid. I really like your paper very much. Your presentation very much. I even chanted your name in the chat. You know, Zahid, 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 followed by several exclamation points. I am curious how you came to be interested in psilocybin.
Okay, so I'm going to take that as a question for me. So Zahid is actually my dad's name. In my culture, my last name is my dad's first name. So I'm Zarmeen. Oh. No, that's totally okay. Hi, I'm Zarmeen. And I have come from a background of mostly working with psilocybin. So I started my psychedelics and science journey over at NYU, and I was early in the project where they were looking at the effects of psilocybin on alcohol dependence. I was a little bit involved in stuff having to do with MDMA, but psilocybin was really the drug that I knew the most about and just had the most opportunity to get involved in, and so built up my expertise in that way. And I also found that psilocybin was one of the better drugs for me, having to do with my research in the lab, to ask my questions having to do with specifically the mechanism of action. But even though psilocybin is one of the bigger drugs that we study and my area of expertise, I do also work with various DMT analogs, DMT itself, LSD, ketamine. That data is just not fully public yet, just because the ends are a little bit too small. But my work with some of the DMT analogs was in my presentation. And psilocybin just so happens to be a drug that I think in our lab is most studied. So I know the most about it pharmacologically and also electrophysiologically, having to do with my work. But good question. Thank you.
All right. So we can move on to questions for Javier. We got one from Craig. The question is, do we know why LSD reduces the intensity of pain perception? Could it have some negative consequences? I'm just thinking of the way other psychoactive substances, for example, alcohol, can make or can mask pain, but it is not necessarily a positive thing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's like few things to consider here. LSD more so changes the perception of pain than just masking it in a way that like alcohol would. And so it just changes how you think about pain and how you experience it. And so for someone with ADHD, that can be very helpful because they experience pain as so much more intense. That's an interesting question though. I don't know, maybe there is some negative aspect to it. I'm thinking particularly in terms of social situations. maybe there's like less, less understanding of rejection or something like that, but I'm not entirely sure. Although I would say it's very different than alcohol, but yeah.
So I actually have a quick question. So do you know the way in which LSD decreases that subjective pain rating? Like, do you know what's happening in the brain and the body to do that? Is it similar to how other analgesics would work, as in like opioids or something else?
So from what I read, it seems to just decrease the number of like receptors that like trigger pain. So, and it's someone's typing something. I don't know the exact biology behind it, but I should have reread this. But I think it's different than analgesics in terms of they tend to just like limit the signaling, right? Basically. So I think it's more so that it's like changing how we perceive this signal and changing like where it goes. But I'm not exactly sure, so I would have to read up more on that. Thank you.
So in the chat, we have Brian providing an additional response to the question. I'll read it out. I'd imagine that a lot of the reduction in intensity of pain is because of serotonin and norepinephrine effects that mediate second-order dorsal horny spinal sensory neurons that are involved in pain processing, similar to why nortriptyline and Cymbalta helps many pain patients. Dorsal horn spinal sensory neurons. Brian, do you by any chance want to speak more or tell us more about what you know? Have you examined connection to LSD?
Or Javier, if you have a comment on that, if that like resonates with you or something, you can comment on that too.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that sounds correct. I don't know exactly. I spend a lot more time like just trying to like fit things together and like understand it. But my background in bio is still at an undergraduate level, so.
That's right. Yeah, that was gonna be my next question. Were you the one that had the like disclaimer at the beginning of your message saying like, remember, I'm an undergrad and this is not like medical advice?
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah, that was a really amazing.
It was basically just like my thoughts and like what I was thinking about the whole microdosing LSD and stuff like that. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that was a good synthesis for the undergraduate level. That was really cool. Cool.
We also have an anonymous question that was just submitted to Javier. Can you speak to other related psychedelics to treat ADHD? Like, would microdosing psilocybin give similar effects?
Yeah, so the paper that I referenced in my talk, it was not only on LSD, it was any microdosing. So it seems like it does help with, like it does seem like other psychedelics tend to help. I think I'm forgetting exactly. I read something about DMT microdosing being used. So I'm guessing psilocybin is probably useful as well. I focused more on LSD because I thought, in terms of it seems to affect norepinephrine and dopamine more so, which is something that is more so dysregulated in ADHD. But I would expect psilocybin to also help with, for example, like the chronic pain aspect and the rejection sensitivity dysphoria.
We also had Dan who raised his hand.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to share, I've been doing a good amount of digging and research and talk on Saturday a bit about the modalities of chronic how, you know, some of these medicines work on with chronic pain. There is, so UC Sandy, there's some research out of in 2020 in UC San Diego, exploring this. Obviously, most people are familiar that, you know, DMT, psilocybin, LSD all work on serotonin 2A. And they, I mean, it doesn't get super specific, but it does mention about, there's like two, it says like the mind altering qualities of psychedelics have been attributed through serotonin 2A to quote, reset areas of functional connectivity in the brain. And additionally, alterations in functional connectivity seen with psychedelic use suggest that these agents could help reverse changes in neuroconnections seen in chronic pain states. So I know that's not super specific, but it's talking about changing the functional connectivity within the neural pathways to help, to what Javier was saying, alter your, mainly a lot of it is altering your perception to it. But there was also something that I wasn't able to spend more time with because I talked about a whole bunch of different things, where I had just lastly, I had it had come across my plate, but I'm not sure where, so it'd be something to dig into. But I was pretty positive I came across some research that was suggesting or theorizing that when these medicines work on serotonin 2A, specifically for chronic pain, there's two sets of gene expressions, and there's one that impacts mainly the perception part, but then there's also another set of genes that help lower inflammation. So like on a physiological level, it actually helps lower inflammation. So yeah, your perception of the pain is changing, but actually your inflammation levels on a physiological level are actually reduced. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something like I mentioned a little bit in my talk where I was talking about neuroinflammation, but it can be, you know, it can be attributed to other parts of the body as well. And I do think that's a really important part that often goes underlooked, like the effect of inflammation on the perception of pain and how, you know, how painful an experience is. So yeah, I definitely thank you so much for adding that information.
Yeah, thank you. You had a great talk. And I loved that learning that people with ADHD perceiving pain. That was a really cool lesson from you. So thank you.
Of course.
All right, any last questions for Javier? Going once, going twice. All right, moving on to Kat. We have an anonymous question for Kat. Do you think nitrous oxide could have similar therapeutic effects as psilocybin or MDMA? What do you think might be the pros or cons of nitrous-assisted therapy compared to psilocybin or MDMA therapy?
It's so nice to see everybody too. And you guys did all such great jobs. Okay, so what was the question? Comparing to psilocybin and MDMA assisted therapies.
Yeah, do you think nitrous oxide could have similar therapeutic effects? I guess probably similar or different therapeutic effects, like when compared to psilocybin or MDMA, and what do you think the pros and cons of that could be?
Yeah, so I think it would be most similar, and I outlined most of the trials that have been used so far, that have been done so far. So that's like, it's very small 20 people trials for major depressive disorder, treatment-resistant depression. And it's most similar to ketamine, I would say, in terms of both its immediacy of efficacy and the length of time for which it's efficacious. So ketamine, usually you can have, if you have one dose, you can have about a week or two of symptom remission. And I think there was a similar time frame for nitrous oxide. So I think it has benefits in the sense that it isn't as strictly regulated as psilocybin and as MDMA. So like ketamine, it can also be used off-label, right? And then also, yeah, like it can be used. There have been protocols kind of developed for using it in dentist office, right? Because that's where it's typically used to have like its analgesic effects. So those kind of protocols can be adapted to use it out of a hospital setting. So there you already have like a bit more information around its like safety data and stuff like that. But yeah, what I really wanted to focus on the talk was more kind of the basic neuroscience that I think Martin and Sami were kind of talking a little bit, that we need a little bit more of, like going back to those like really basic questions of like, what is the drug doing in the brain? And like, how in such this like complex organ can we have an outcome from such a simple molecule, right? So I think it has a lot of maybe opportunity there due to its lack of restrictions, and it's like fairly well established, not saying it's completely safe, but it has a well established profile of safety because it's been used for so long. And yeah, then who knows for treatment? I think maybe with like ketamine versus psilocybin MDMA, we can kind of see where these treatments could kind of start to fit in different ways together, right? Like ketamine is really helpful for suicidal ideation and like immediate remission from symptoms. So that would maybe be more efficacious in like a very short-term kind of way, whereas psilocybin and MDMA may have more like of these long-term effects. So there may be an ecosystem where they can all kind of fit in together for different ways.
I've sort of follow-up to that, because now you have me thinking, do you see there being any utility? I know sometimes in certain contexts, people talk about the use of like using MDMA as like an on-ramp for a psilocybin experience or something. Do you see any potential like use of nitrous there or something, and talking about like combining things? If like, I know nitrous of course makes you really happy and cheerful and giggly and stuff. So like, could that sort of induction of an emotion that's very uplifting and stuff maybe be an on-ramp to like psilocybin therapy or something?
I mean, yeah, I don't really know the answer to that. I think that it is used so frequently in dentistry. Like, I think the first time I've had nitrous oxide was when I was 8 years old and I was getting like a tooth taken out. And like, I remember feeling like kind of weird about it, but I was like, okay, that was cool. Who knows what that was? But maybe that's an easy introduction. It would be interesting maybe to see people that have had conscious nitrous under dentistry and like maybe to like subsequent other kind of psychoactive interventions, or see how people like just see how that effect alone people react to if they're having like general dental surgery. But the good thing with nitrous oxide too is that you can, for example, if you're inhaling it, you remove it, the effects are gone like very, very quickly. So I think in that sense, it might be a good introduction, because if people start to feel maybe like start to have some paranoid thoughts, start to feel overwhelmed, you can just cut it, which you can't do with psilocybin and MDMA.
Yeah, that's really cool. All right, do we have any other questions for Kat before we move on? We have Clifford raised his hand again here. Want to talk? Right, go ahead, Clifford. You're a Q&A superstar.
Yeah, I'm just a sponge soaking up all this great information. So, Kat, I'm curious: is a nitrous oxide an area you tend to continue pursuing, researching in the future?
Well, the interest from this was because I started in a lab in the UK before the pandemic, so I kind of had a bit of insight to how those experiments would kind of go down. And so I can see the infrastructure for doing more experiments like this. And I think that what I would be interested in doing, which includes maybe building some models of behavioral changes under psychedelics, would be most easily facilitated by nitrous oxide at the moment, given our strict regulations. It's kind of hard to get an experiment with healthy volunteers and give them psilocybin right now. So it might be a good way to start some basic research.
This might be getting, so I have a quick question. Sorry, Alex. This might be getting a little bit into the weeds, but so I don't know much about nitrous oxide, but I do know that its acute effects on the brain are obviously it's opiate effects right in the CNS at the level of the spinal cord, but also that it's an NMDA receptor antagonist. And something interesting about psychedelics, especially the serotonergic psychedelics, and one of the big hypotheses is the reason why they are long lasting is because of their modulatory effects on not NMDA receptors, AMPA receptors, and also just glutamate transmission in general. So that's a little bit conflicting mechanisms of action if we're having NMDA receptor antagonism, whereas like something like psilocybin is going to long-term increase that glutamate transmission. So I'm wondering if you've thought about it in the biological sense, or if there's sort of like any data out there with drugs that do something similar like this. Because that idea, Alex, that you brought up of having nitrous oxide be like sort of the opener, right, would be very interesting. But what if it is completely like opposite of the effects of psilocybin, right? Like what we're hoping psychedelics will do. So I'm just wondering if that's something that there's any like data on, or.
Well, a lot of nitrous oxide is very understudied for its psychoactive effects,
For
right?
sure.
You go to like PubMed, you look through everything. A lot of it is just gonna be like dental or like atmospheric stuff, because again, it's also like present in the atmosphere. It's a greenhouse gas. So like a lot of environmental stuff. But I would kind of extrapolate a little bit to the ketamine literature as well, right? Because that's an NMDA receptor antagonist. And then you kind of have these like parallels being drawn between psilocybin and ketamine in a way. They're obviously very different. And I think there is something interesting in that there is this downstream glutamatergic effect for psilocybin. And there is this like glutamatergic effect with ketamine, but the psilocybin one is longer lasting. So if these mechanisms are related, that kind of give them these overlapping psychoactive effects or overlapping therapeutic benefits. Why is psilocybin so much longer? Where is the mechanism that induces these long-term changes at somewhere between the 5-HT2A and the glutamate effects, maybe? So I think it's a very interesting question, but I don't have an answer. I don't know.
Really, really cool like area of study and interest though, Kat. Really cool. Never like heard about it. So yeah.
If there aren't any other questions, we'll be moving on to Gerardo's talk and the questions that were submitted to him. Okay, so next, Gerardo, you received a first question from Craig Clark. I was wondering if the phenomenology of ayahuasca experience, eidetic images, hallucinatory phenomena, etc., might interrupt meditative practice or make it more challenging.
Yeah, actually, well, I think it's a pretty nice question. And actually, I think it's part of it. Like, part of the idea of mixing meditation with psychedelics is being able to kind of control those images or that phenomenology with your mental capacities. So it's challenging, and I also think it could also bring more therapeutic effects. Like with meditation, you can kind of drive the trip better, or those images, can understand them better, like accept them better. So you can maybe reach deeper levels of the trip or other levels of the trip. You know? But yeah, I mean, it's all our suggestions, you know, it's like it's pretty hard to get to know the phenomenology and how does it works. So there are a lot of teams working on that, but there are all suggestions. You know?
A continued question from Sergio Lazaro Martinez. Thank you for such an interesting talk, Gerardo. Is there any idea suggesting when would meditation induce the largest therapeutic effects, as in before, during, after the ayahuasca experience?
Yeah, I cannot really tell. I don't know if you guys have any ideas, because I mean, my suggestion would be like based on how ayahuasca has been traditionally consumed. You see that most of the traditions tend to repeat the preparing states, so like before the trip, because even like the dietas, although it means like physical restrictions, but it also means a mental exercise, you know. And I think that's the feature that is most repeated with regards to when to include meditation. But I think the other, like also including meditation during the trip or after could also bring nice therapeutic effects, and it's something still that needs research. So there are different hypotheses supporting that it could be useful in all the stages. But yeah, I could not say that there's any specific moment in which ayahuasca or like meditation could improve more the effects of the psychedelics. You know?
And then we have another question from Bianca Watt. Do you have any recommendations for individuals wanting to study the effects of ayahuasca and/or assisted therapy without contributing to appropriation of traditional medicine by bringing it into a Western context?
Yeah, actually, I mean, I think that's a pretty nice question. I really like the question because it's the question I'm facing every day, because it's really difficult to kind of do research with plant medicine, to say. So, well, Jordi Riba, back in his time, was doing most of his research with it. But now I would recommend to reach the team in Maastricht University. They are not doing yet laboratory studies based in laboratory settings with ayahuasca. But yeah, I think I mean, I don't know about other places. So I think it's nice to bring this up to the conversation, because it's also really interesting to maybe look at the changes or the differences between using the plant-based product compared to the synthetic one, for example, which, although it's not that standardized, it also brings more benefits in terms of polypharmacological interactions, you know. So yeah, I think it's like really nice to bring this to the conversation, actually.
And then you have one more question from Anonymous. Do you think these prosocial changes are inherent to any ayahuasca experience? Or do you think a person has to have some prior intention of improving their social cognition in order to experience sustained prosocial improvements?
Yeah, again, I don't have like a clear answer, I might say. Well, again, it's a really nice question, I think. But anyways, like when it was the study I mentioned in my presentation, in which they look at the effects of ayahuasca on facial emotion recognition, it's true that there could be, yeah, like the patient could be predisposed to think that ayahuasca could improve his prosocial effects. But it's true that it was done in a setting in which the patient was alone, only with a research group, so not more in like a group setting. So we could also see some difference, but I could not really tell, you know, if like how the preconceptions of the participants could affect the prosocial effects. Although we see also that the serotonin system is highly affected by, or it's highly involved in the prosocial effects, not only of ayahuasca, but also of psilocybin, LSD, or MDMA. So I think this receptor, especially the 5-HT2A, has a lot of implications. And even though the preconception of the participants could also induce some prosocial effects by itself. You know?
And we just got one more question too in the Q&A for you from Kevin. How has your training as a pharmacist informed your studies into psychedelics?
Yeah, I mean, well, thanks, Kevin, for reaching and for the question. And yeah, it was really helpful, actually. Like, especially, I think that's mainly what I got into the study of ayahuasca, because it's like it brings a lot of pharmacology in the sense that you are mixing compounds. So I don't know if I haven't studied pharmacy, I would have been able to properly understand the effects of ayahuasca or understand them in the way that I did.
Craig, did you still have another question? I saw you raised your hand briefly. Okay.
Well, yeah, if there's no any question, yeah, thank you so much for such an interesting questions, really.
Yeah, do we have any other questions if anyone wants to ask? Is it Gerardo?
Yeah,
I don't know how to pronounce it.
It's quite hard. Gerardo, you know, it's like...
Gerardo. Okay.
But no, it was nice, it was nice.
If not, we can also open it up at the same time. Zarmeen, there are no like pre-asked questions in the Q&A for Zarmeen, but we can open up the floor for asking any questions to Zarmeen as well. Oh, Uma, right away.
Well, I've been wondering this for you and really for everyone. Like, I just am fascinated by how everyone came up with their research questions, and whether it be like, lab-based or just like independent. Like, so I guess, Zarmeen, how did you come up with your research question?
Yeah, so I talk a little bit about this in my presentation too, but the one thing that sort of spurs me generally in neuroscience, right, is trying to understand biologically at the level of the brain what is happening. We have, like, when I first started my journey having to do with psychedelics, right, we were hearing about these crazy results that people are taking psychedelics and they feel so much like better, they're different, their alcohol dependent significantly, better, whatever. But I would ask the question, how is that happening, right? And the answer is, oh, it's probably, this and this and this, but there's no real answer. And that's what we're all trying to do, right? So that is really what pushed me to be a neuroscientist, as a neuroscientist, to study these changes at a very biological level, at a level that's a little bit separated from those phenomenological changes happening, right, having to do with the experience itself, because I think it's so important that we understand both aspects of it to actually harness the full potential of these drugs, right? There's no doubt that both of these the experience and also the biological changes are having the effects that we're seeing, the therapeutic effects, right? But we don't fully understand the biological changes. We also don't fully understand the psychological changes. So really my interest comes from being able to, trying to answer that question, right? If someone asks me, oh, well, what is it doing in the brain? I want to be able to give people an answer. And to me, psychopharmacology, the study of behavior having to do with drugs, and electrophysiology was a very natural route to go down. So I'm in grad school trying to sort of marry those interests and get an answer as to what's happening in the brain with these drugs, and specifically having to do with their therapeutic benefit, right? Because we do know a lot about sort of mechanistically what receptors they're affecting, whatever, but we haven't found the therapeutically relevant mechanism just as of yet, right? Or various mechanisms, or what is the perfect storm that's happening in the brain to induce this psychological behavioral change that we're seeing long term. So that's what really spurs me. Thanks for that question.
Yeah, I mean, and everything you said is literally like me as someone like hopefully trying to follow in your footsteps, is like what pivoted me from, on my journey from psychology to neuroscience, because I'm just like, but what's happening? And that's why I'm trying to get over my fear of mice and like figure out how to do all this. But like, how did you, from all of that, like distill your question? I'm sure you have so many questions and so many ideas. Like, how did you distill that question down to like the specific circuit that you talk about in your presentation? Like, how did you pick that?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, I'm looking at synaptic plasticity, right? So changes in the way that the cells functionally or structurally talk to each other. And I was able to get there from that neuroplastic hypothesis of psychedelic action. There aren't too many hypotheses to choose from. But as a neuroscientist, synaptic plasticity, specifically as an electrophysiologist, that is also something that is measurable for me. And then at the level of behavior, I am trying to make this clinically relevant, right? I do want my work to have some clinical translational relevance to it. So it was really important for me to look in a circuit that is dysregulated in cases of psychiatric disorder. And plasticity, you tend to look in the hippocampus, right? Very, very important brain area for a lot of things. And then the medial prefrontal cortex or the frontal cortex in general, very important for higher order executive functioning, cognitive thinking. And this circuit, this hippocampal to prefrontal cortical, specifically ventral hippocampal to medial prefrontal cortical circuit, is very reliably dysregulated across the board in all cases of psychiatric disorder in both humans, and then also in stress-induced phenotypes in animals, in animal studies. So that sort of made that link for me. This is a circuit that we know that we'll see changes, right? And specifically dysregulation in cases of psychiatric disorder, or in the cases of animals, stress-induced, whatever. And so this is what made it sort of clinically relevant, transdiagnostically, whatever. So this is what I decided to sort of look at, and it's been good so far. You know, as it happens in science, you got to pick a spot and go for it, and if it doesn't work out, you just move on to the next one. But I've been pretty lucky, and it's been there's just so many questions, so many things to ask. So I'll be here in this circuit for quite some time. But I hope that answers your question.
Definitely. And
Yeah,
I love hearing people's thought process on how they, come to specifically like the specific question that they're answering and how that branches out and grows. And I love it so much. And I guess I have another question too. I could ask you forever, so I won't take up everyone's time. But, and I feel like this might be something that anyone who's watching who would like to participate in, very basic science, psychedelic research in the way you are, like, might be wondering, like, what kind of maybe like advice or guidance would you have to someone who wants to like find a program in a lab and like a way to do the kind of research you're doing?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So there are now many more grad programs that are very specifically tailored towards exploration of psychedelic compounds, right? Here at UW-Madison, we have the Transdisciplinary Center for Study of on Psychoactive Substances. And I know Hopkins has a really big center. And the tough thing here is that a lot of things are not centralized as these two centers are. So you kind of just have to do your research and find labs that are working on these questions, right? Like you literally look up journal articles and send people emails, be like, hey, like, I'm very interested in your work. I'm wondering what your lab is doing. And it's more than likely there are labs all across the country that are doing research having to do with this, right? And it's just a matter of reaching out and sometimes even cold emailing. I mentioned this before, my journey really started in high school. I started working at NYU as a high schooler. And what I did was I literally emailed every single lab across the country that was doing psychedelics work at the time, which was in what, like 2013, 2014. So there wasn't that big of a list. And I was like, listen, I will literally get you coffee, or like, I will chat with you on the phone, teach me whatever you know. And people are willing, to talk. It's a small field right now. And collaboration is so important, especially to a field like this. And a lot of your guys' presentations were getting at this, right? At the transdisciplinary nature of all of this stuff. There's sociology, there's psychology, there's neuroscience, there's biology, there's pharmacology. This is not a field that can exist just in one sphere alone, right? Like it has to have sort of interdisciplinary collaboration. And so I think reaching out and just also, it's okay to study, learn a skill, learn a technique first, and then get to a point where you can ask questions that are specific to psychedelics. But there might also be resources. I'm sure that maybe IPN has a list of grad programs or something, but I know that there's like a list of grad programs that are specifically recruiting for psychedelic studies having to do with like psychedelic exploration that might exist. So that might be a good actual tangible resource and good place to start. But yeah, I think reach out. Scientists are nice people. we like for people to read our stuff. We're like, I think scientists are a little bit like, you know, narcissistic too. Tell us that you like the work. We'll talk to you. I've had tons of undergraduate students reach out and sort of join the lab, just being like, oh, this is so cool. This is so interesting. I'm like, you want to come work with mice? I always need people. So yeah, great question. But also just reach out, anyone, like whenever. I love to talk about this stuff. I mentor a lot of undergrad students as well, but you guys are all peers and this is amazing. I think we're all trying to grow this field. So I think everyone would have really good advice on this. So thanks.
Cool. Yeah, I just want to also make a comment that we have a couple general questions for everybody that we can open it up to in just a moment. We'll give everybody a chance to ask specific questions for Zarmeen too. But I also just want to acknowledge that we're going over a little over on time for Q&A. So just like letting you know, like we're opening up and we can stay on for a little bit longer to get those questions answered and stuff. So we'll open it up for, let's say like 15 to 20 minutes longer, but I also want to check in with all of you panelists to be respectful of your time and stuff since we're going over. Does anybody need to take off early, or are you able to stay on for another 15, 20 minutes to ask? To answer
yeah, unfortunately, I have to leave. I want to thank first the organizing team for organizing everything and for having us the chance to participate in this event. And yeah, and thank you so much for everyone for the time, their attention, and for the amazing questions also. So yeah, thank you so much, and yeah, see you again somewhere pretty soon. Okay, bye-bye.
Awesome, thanks, Gerardo. All right, does anyone else need to take off?
I can stay on for another 15 minutes.
Okay, cool. All right. So yeah, the first general question for everybody is from Anonymous. If you can temporarily imagine 10 years into the future and assume that all psychedelics are now legal in some capacity and research opportunities and directions with them has opened up immensely, what do you think would be the most interesting application of psychedelics, either for research or outside the research lab? So that's the question, and it's about to be posted in the chat too. And the way we'll do this is just like, if you have any thoughts that are at the top of your mind, go for it, and you can just unmute and start answering. And if you don't have any thoughts, that's fine too. You can just stay muted. So yeah, it's now in the chat too, if you need to re-answer it. Javier, go for it.
Hello. I guess like, I don't know if this is the most interesting, but it's like something that's just like intriguing to me. But I know that traditionally there's kind of this practice of like, you know, the therapist like taking psychedelics and then administering therapy to like better understand, like to see mental health through like new perspective and such. And I think that'd be really interesting, especially for like people that, you know, especially for like doctors and psychiatrists and stuff who can get kind of stuck into prescribing like the same medication or having like one set like form of treating disorders. But yeah, that's just one. I think there's like hundreds of thousands of different ways that it could be used. So I'm excited to see the future.
Guess I'll go next. What immediately came to mind was, well, if you saw my presentation, you might be able to tell that I'm kind of a geek about the critical learning periods reopening. And that's something I think about constantly, and just like exploring that theory and, you know, not just the social critical learning periods, but other critical learning periods that, you know, are generally, you know, closed and then we can't reopen. So if everything was legal and open, it would be so cool to explore the therapeutic potential of critical learning periods reopening and how that can affect different conditions that are generally constrained in their treatments by critical learning periods, such as far as I understand, blindness and deafness and traumatic brain injuries, strokes, just so many things. Like, what can we do to intervene in a therapeutic way if those critical learning periods are reopened? And if it's also not super obvious right now, I'm kind of a super fan of Dr. Goldolin, and that this is a lot of her theorized application and work for psychedelics. So please go check it out if you haven't already.
I'll go next. If you gave us like 10 years and like some beautiful progressive wave of drug decriminalization, legalization, and research, I think it would be nice to see like the distribution of it at the personalized medical level. So being able to say, okay, do we have, are there any sort of genetic indicators that you would be susceptible to this? And then going from all the way from that to like, okay, here's the perfect compound for what you want to deal with. But then not suturing that to, again, just being like, okay, feed it through the algorithm, what kind of cocktail do we need to make? It would have to be, I'd want it to be like humanized individual experience. So if we could bring, I guess, shamanism back, that'd be nice in the next 10 years. That would be great.
Javier just posted, gave me another interesting idea. I wonder how psychedelics affects attachment style or theory.
Now that topic is really familiar. I want to, like, I've seen a talk on this before, and I want to say it was maybe one of last year's PsychedelX presentations. That might be wrong, but you could look through, I think we have a link actually in the link tree to IPN's YouTube page. You might be able to find it there. I think that's maybe where I was hearing about it, or maybe it was one of the other applicants or something. But yeah, if you're really interested in trying to figure out, you can reach out to me and I can see if I can pull it up. But yeah, it's an interesting idea.
I was just going to add, I would love to see a bunch of like PET studies for receptor occupancy, because there have been like a few, but I think they cost a lot of money too. But like I think recently it was the Vollenweider study that showed that it wasn't the amount of, with psilocybin, the amount of receptors that were occupied, but is a proportion, right? And so individuals have, like, for example, 5-HT2A receptor densities changing over their lifetime. Those can be affected by, for example, progesterone, estrogen fluxes in like women, right? So like, I think if you could just get like a wealth of PET scan studies across like individuals and like over time, that would be really cool. But that I think is more of like an idealistic, like if we had all the resources rather than we had 10 years in legality.
All right, we can move on to the next general question then. Again, from Anonymous. Moving forward with research, how do we ensure good faith, rigorous psychedelic science? Right now, with the promise of psychedelics trending and a lot of hype and high-spirited optimism in the air, how do we ensure in scientific communication that we execute utmost rational scrutiny over all experimental designs and data collected, and that we are not downplaying some of the potential risks or side effects of psychedelics? And remember to also report or communicate in good faith the less desirable results from past, current, and future research. So that's the question. I also just want to like do a plug here, because like this question is like what the topic of tomorrow's keynote is about, from Haley Duran. So if you're interested in learning more about that, tune into her keynote at 3:10 UTC time or 11:10 Eastern time for a deeper dive into that. But yeah, I'd be curious what all of y'all think about that. And we'll post that question in the chat here too, if you want to read it again.
Yeah, so I love this question. This is something that we talk about quite often in my lab and just very generally. I think this is also a very good general science question, right? Like, how do you ensure rigorous and like well done statistics all across the board? I think with psychedelics, it's very easy for people to get a little carried away, right? Like there are amazing results that are coming out of these clinical studies, right? Like people that have treatment resistant depression are better, but we do need to point out that these drugs are not a panacea, right? Cognitive behavioral therapy does work for a lot of people still. Some individuals that psychedelics won't even work for, right? So these drugs are not a panacea, and we can't be afraid of saying that. That isn't going to lessen the viability of the results that we're getting now. And also what we were talking about with Uma, we have to be very, very critical of all the work that comes out of everywhere. I collaborate across a couple of departments with my work, and we have meetings every week where we sit down and we critically evaluate the work. We get some awesome results, but not every awesome result is what it's cracked out to be, right? You have to make sure that what you're doing is rigorous at the experiment, like the idea, the level of the idea, the level of the experiment, the level of the statistics, and the way that you communicate it to the public. And I think one of the biggest things right now is we have to recognize we have such a responsibility in the way that we communicate our ideas, not only scientific, but whatever ideas we have about the future of this field or what we are even hope for, right? Because this is something that people are very excited about. It's like, oh yeah, it's psychedelics, like that's so cool, like people are like actually using this in a good way. But I have the amount of people I have come up to me be like, can I be in your study? And it's funny, and it is what it is, but you have to be so careful because you don't want to perpetuate this idea that these drugs are going to solve all your problems, because that's not true, right? Like, and we are trying to figure out to what extent it is true and what extent it's not true. So I think just very much like holding yourself accountable, and also your peers and everyone else responsible for the way that we show people what we have, what we find, what we think, and what we know. And I think very generally across the board, right? Like, don't be afraid to call people out. Maybe especially people that might be more established in the field, because it's those people that are setting the face, right, of this field and sort of how we go, what we do. Don't be afraid to call people out. That is my advice, and that is what I stick to. Sometimes it gets you in trouble, but that's science, right? Science isn't sometimes isn't great, but yeah, so that's my 2 cents. That's how I feel. I think that's a great question, and I'm very glad that everyone's sort of thinking about it. So.
Yeah, I wanted to really expand this on this in my presentation, because I don't want to be like, let's just give people nitrous oxide. Like I don't think that's a good idea. Like, I think there's a lot of things that you have to consider around this. Informed consent, I think being really explicit to people about the risks that they're facing, even if they're very like vague risks or unlikely risks. I think we have to, so with a therapeutic context, we have these practices that are developing around preparation and integration. And so I think from the basic research perspective, where you have healthy volunteers coming in, I wonder what kind of responsibility we have as researchers for the people's care during this time. Like, I'm not sure about the groups in Switzerland, what they do with their healthy volunteers. Do they give them preparation sessions? Do they like check in after, be like, hey, how are you doing? Like, do you need some integration for this experience? Like, do you need to process some of this? Yeah, because I like piloted the experiment that we did with nitrous oxide, right? And yeah, like it was kind of like weird after. Like, I definitely say that there are like some considerations around just feeling like, ooh, okay, I feel like I just like ran a bit or something. Like, I need to kind of like sit down and kind of like be aware that my day isn't going to go the same way as it did if I hadn't just done some drugs right now, right? And then I think another thing too is I think basic neuropharmacology research, we have to weigh the risks and benefits. The benefits, of course, are understanding effects, like drug effects, when people are already doing it. People already use nitrous oxide recreationally. We kind of need this information to like understand how to help people if something bad does happen, right? But at the same time, I think when we think of like the benefits, or sorry, the risks, we say like, oh, if something happens to one person, you know, that risk versus the benefits. I think we have to look at the risk for the individual. And I think we have to realize that those individual risks are going to differ based on the individual, right? So some people might be more susceptible to developing compulsive habits of, like, for example, ketamine or nitrous oxide use. So we really need to, like, yeah, be better in our cost benefit analysis, I think, too.
And I hope, I've been scared to like say this because I hope it's communicated in the way that I hope to communicate it. But while there is such a negative side, or, you know, negative gradient to the amount of stigma against psychedelics, and, you know, the war against the research, and just like the way research has played out over the last several decades, and how it's only now, you know, having a resurgence in some level of acceptance, like I do see a silver lining of, you know, healthy amounts of skepticism and questions, like at least within basic science. Like I appreciate people just giving it a really hard look, maybe more so than just any other topic, because of everything we just talked about. And nothing is either or. So I'm just seeing the sort of benefits of the skepticism in that way.
Yeah, I don't think there was ever going to be like a dearth of skepticism within psychedelic space just because of the cultural history of it. But to harness that and then to provide positive scientific like validity to that, I think is a way to really basically jujitsu all that social movement, right? It's being able to activate the people that were previously uninterested in it and making them make it a possibility for them that they can pursue this, even if they, for whatever reason, they grew up in like some Reagan era kind of like social conditions. So again, communication science is key. There is no science without it being disseminated into the larger society at large.
All right, we have just another minute or two left on the 15-minute edition that we added in. So if anyone has any last comments or anything, either on those general questions about like just what kind of interesting applications we see future, or having more good faith, rigorous psychedelic science, we can take those comments.
Alex, can I make a comment? Or may
Sure.
I make a comment? I guess anyone who's participating, like anyone who's listening right now, who has kind of a burgeoning idea and is interested in this field, I strongly encourage them to apply next year, the next time you guys do this. Personally, for me and Sami, I think it was a really rewarding process. And the support that you get from this organization is really good. So anyone who might have like a little inkling of like, oh, this is really fun, this is really cool, I want to do this, then like, yeah, listen to your heart, listen to your brain there, you know. Especially as kind of like researchers, you're gonna have a shit ton of ideas get rejected before you get that one good one too. So it's really important to I'm not saying it's the numbers game, it's quality game too, but the numbers game definitely helps. And the people of this organization, every time I've interacted with them, has been like super supportive and really helped shape like what we presented. I can't speak for the other like speakers, but it really helped. So get engaged is my one comment to take up the last minute. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, we try to get better every day and be as supportive as we can.
Thank you. I hope that psychedelics keeps growing and that more and more people reach out with their ideas and want to present themselves and share what they've been thinking about. Young people should have the chance to do that more frequently in the current environment than they do.
Agreed. All right, yeah. Well, thanks everyone for staying on and answering some questions and stuff, and for all the work you put into your presentations. This is a pleasure to watch these. And just also a note that we'll be posting all of these talks on IPN's YouTube channel on the last day of PsychedelX, at which point we'll be moving like things. There's another component to the voting for this, and there's going to be a People's Choice Award for each category. So for everyone listening and tuning in, and for all of you panelists also, share the talk far and wide, share your favorite talks, go and like them on YouTube, and yeah, get the word out there. And yeah, so that concludes the Natural Sciences Day of Psychedelics. Thank you so much to all of our presenters, our keynote speakers, Raphael and Carly, our audience for asking great questions, and everyone who made this event possible. Tune in at the same time, same place tomorrow for our Psychology and Clinical Applications Day. To kick off our day tomorrow, we will hear from Haley Duran, as I mentioned. She's a PhD student at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, and also the brains behind the first ever psychedelics event last year. She used to work in IPN. Her talk is titled Beyond the Renaissance, and she'll be talking about the current transitional time as the initial hype of the psychedelic renaissance transitions into its next phase, with a focus on the role of students in this transition. Thank you again, and have a good night or afternoon or morning or whatever time it is in the time zone you're in right now. And thanks for tuning in.